So I logged back on tonight and was blown away by the staggering amount of interest it seems to have generated. First off, I'll address a few things that you guys have brought up. There's a lot of feedback about the stairs, so I'll touch on that briefly here, and also I'll include a story. They come in a variety of shapes, sizes, styles, and conditions. Some are pretty dilapidated, some are ruined, others are brand new. I saw one set that looked like they came from a lighthouse. They were metal and spiral, almost old-fashioned. The stairs don't go up infinitely, or rather than I can see, but some sets are taller than others. Like I said before, just imagine the stairs in your house, as if somebody cut and pasted them in the middle of nowhere. I don't have any pictures. It's never really occurred to me to try again after the first time, and I don't really feel like risking my job for it. I'll try again in the future, but I really can't promise you anything. A few people expressed confusion about the guy who ran into the man with no face. Just to clarify, when the climber ascended and reached the top of the peak, he saw another man in a parka and ski pants. This was the man with no face. Sorry about the confusing wording of the story. I'll try to avoid that in the future. As far as missing persons go, I'd say about half the calls I get are related to that. The others are rescue calls, people who fall down cliffs and hurt themselves, people getting burnt by fire, which mostly was kids, drunk kids, getting bitten or stung by animals or insects, stuff like that. We're a tight team. We have veterans who are excellent at finding signs of lost people. That's what makes the cases where we never find any trace of them so frustrating. One in particular was upsetting for all of us because we did find a trace of them, but it just led to more questions than answers. An older man had been hiking alone on a well-established trail, but his wife called to say that he hadn't come home when he should have. Apparently, he had a history of seizures, and she was worried that he hadn't taken his medication and had suffered one out on the trail. Before you ask, I have no idea why he thought it was okay to go out alone, or why she didn't go with him. I don't ask about that kind of thing, because past a certain point, it really doesn't matter. Someone is missing, and it's my job to find them. We went out in a standard search of formation, and it wasn't long before one of our vets found signs that the guy had gone off the trail. We grouped up and followed him, spreading out in a fan to make sure we covered as much ground as possible. Suddenly, a call comes over the radio telling us to all head back to the vet's location. We come right away because this usually means that the missing person is injured, and we all need the full team to get them back to safety. We meet back up, and the vet is just standing at the base of a tree with his hands on the sides of his head. I asked my buddy what was going on, and he points up into the branches of the tree. I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing, but there was a walking stick dangling from a branch, at least 30 feet above the ground. The little strap thing on the handle had been looped around the branch, and it's just hanging there. There's no way the guy could have tossed it up that far, and we don't see any other signs that he's still in the area. We call up into the tree, but it's obviously no one's in it. We're all just sort of left scratching our heads. We keep searching for the guy, but we never find him. We even bring our canines out, but they lost his scent as soon as they get to the tree. Eventually the search is called off because there are other calls we have to attend to, and past a certain point there's not much we can do. The guy's wife called us every day for months asking if we'd found her husband, and it was heartbreaking to hear him get more and more hopeless each time. I'm not sure why this call in particular was so upsetting, but I think it was just sheer improbability of it. That and the questions that were raised. How the hell had this guy's cane ended up there? Did someone kill him or toss him up in some weird trophy? We did our best to find him, but it's almost like a taunt. We still talk about that one from time to time. Missing kids are the most heartbreaking. Doesn't matter what circumstances they go missing under. It's never easy, and we always dread the ones we find deceased. It's not common, but it does happen. David Pauldis talks a lot about kids SAR teams find in places they shouldn't be or couldn't be. I can honestly say I've heard about these kinds of things happening more than I've seen it, but I'll share one of the ones that I think about a lot that I witnessed personally. A mother and her 3 kids were out on a picnic area in the park that had a small lake. One is 6, one is 5, and the other is about 3. She's watching them all really closely, and according to her, she never lets them out of her sight at any time. She never saw anyone else in the area either, which is important. She packs their stuff up and they start to head back to the parking area. Now this lake is only about 2 miles in the woods, and it is very clearly established trail. It's almost impossible to get lost getting from the parking area to it unless you're deliberately going off the path like an imbecile. Her kids are walking in front of her when she hears what sounds like someone coming up the path behind her. She turns around, and in the 4 or so seconds she's not looking, her 5-year-old son vanishes. She figures he stepped off the trail to pee or something, and she asks her other 2 to go look for him. They both tell her that a big man with a scary face came out of the woods next to them, took the kid's hand, and led him into the trees. The two remaining kids didn't seem upset. In fact, she says later that it seems like they've been drugged. They're sort of spacey and fuzzy. So, of course, she freaks out, starts looking frantically in the area for her kid. She's screaming his name. She says at the point she thinks she heard him answer her. Now, obviously, she can't go blindly running into the woods. She's got the other two kids. So she calls the police and they send us out immediately. We respond and we start the search for him. Over the course of this search, which spans miles, we never find a single trace of the kid. Canines can't pick up any scent. We don't find any clothing or broken bushes or literally anything that would signify a child being there. Of course, there's suspicion about the mother for a while, but it's pretty clear that she's completely destroyed about the whole thing. We looked for the kid for weeks, with a lot of volunteer help, but eventually the search peters out, and we have to move on. The volunteers keep searching though, and one day we get a call on the radio letting us know that a body had been found and needs to be recovered. They tell us the location, and none of us can believe it. We figure it has to be a different kid. But we go out there, about 15 miles from the site where he vanished, and sure enough, we find the body of the kid we've been looking for. I've been trying to figure out how this kid got where he did, but ever since we found him, and I've never come up with an answer. Volunteer just happened to be in the area because he figured he might as well look in places no one else would think of off chance the body had been dumped. He comes to the base of a tall, rocky slope, and halfway up he sees something. He looks through his binoculars and sure enough, it's the body of a little boy, stuffed in a little opening in the rock. He recognizes the color of the kid's shirt, so he knows right away that it's the missing boy. That's when he calls it in, and we're dispatched. It took us almost an hour to get his body down, and none of us could believe what we were seeing. Not only was this kid 15 miles from where he'd started, there was no possible way he could have gotten up there on his own. This slope is treacherous. It's hard even for us with our climbing gear. A 5-year-old boy had no way of getting up there, of that I'm certain. Not only that, but the kid doesn't have a scratch on him. His shoes are gone, but his feet are damaged or dirty. So it wasn't as if an animal dragged him up there. From what we could tell, he hasn't been dead for that long. He'd been out there for over a month at that point, and it looked like he'd been dead for at most a day or two. The whole thing was unbelievably strange. That was one of the most discerning calls I've ever been on. We found out later that the coroner determined the kid had died from exposure. He'd frozen to death, probably late at night, days before we found him. There were no suspects and no answers. To date, it's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. One of my first jobs as a trainee was a search op for a 4-year-old kid that had gotten separated from his mom. This is one of those cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a strong scent trail and we saw clear signs that he was in the area. We ended up finding him in a berry patch about a half mile from where he'd been last seen. One of the vets brought him back, which I was glad for because I'm not really good with kids, and I find it hard to talk to them and keep them company. As my trainer and I are headed back, she decides to take me on a detour to show me one of the hot spots where we tend to find missing people. It's a natural dip in the land near a popular trail, and people will usually move downhill because it's easier. We hike out there. It's a few miles away. We get there in about an hour or so. As we're walking around the area, she's pointing out places she finds people in the past. I see something in the distance. Now this area we're in is about 8 miles from the main parking area. Though there's back roads you could take to get closer if you want to hike that far, but we're on a state protected land, which means there can't be any kind of commercial or residential development out here. The most you'll ever see is a fire tower, a makeshift shelter that homeless people think they can get away with building. But I can see from here that whatever this thing is has straight edges, and if there's one thing you learn quickly, it's that nature rarely makes straight lines. I point it out, but she doesn't say anything. She just hangs back and lets me wander over and check it out. I get within about 20 feet of it, and all the hair on the back of my neck stands up. It's a staircase. In the middle of the fucking woods. The proper context, it would literally be the most benign thing ever. It's just a normal staircase, with a beige carpet and about 10 steps tall. But instead of being in a house, where it obviously should be, it's out here in the middle of the woods. The sides aren't carpeted, obviously, and I can see the wood. It's almost like a video game glitch, where the house has failed to load completely and the stairs are the only thing visible. I stand there, and it's like my brain is working overtime to try and make sense of what I'm seeing. My trainer comes and stands next to me, and she just stands there casually, looking at it as if it's the least interesting thing she's ever seen in the world. I ask her what the fuck this thing is doing here, and she just chuckles. Get used to it, rookie. You're gonna see a lot of them. I start to move closer, but she grabs my arm hard. I wouldn't do that, she says. Her voice is casual, but her grip is tight, and I just stand there looking at her. You're gonna see them all the time, but don't go near them. Don't touch them, don't go up to them, just ignore them. I start to ask her about it, but something in the way she's looking at me tells me that it's best I don't. We end up moving on and the subject doesn't come up again for the rest of my training. She was right though. I'd say about every 5th call I go on, I end up running across a set of stairs. Sometimes they're relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes they're 20, 30 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere. And I can only find them during the broadest searches or training weekends. They're usually in good condition, but sometimes it looks like they've been out there for miles. All different kinds, all different sizes. The biggest I've ever saw came up turn of the century mansion, and were at least 10 feet wide with steps leading up to at least 15 or 20 feet. I've tried talking about it with people, but they just give me the same response my trainer did. It's normal. Don't worry about it. They're not a big deal. But don't go close to them or to them. When trainees ask me about it now, I give them the same response. I don't really know what else to tell them. I'm really hoping someday I get a better answer, but it hasn't happened yet.